Azure Virtual Desktop. It's a scalable VDI solution. It's enabled users to access virtual desktops and applications from anywhere. That's the essence of any VDI solution. With a AVD, we have the management and control plane hosted in Azure. So we're talking about web access, gateway, broker, diagnostics, REST API. But we have session hosts for Azure Local actually hosted on premise. And that is the crux of the differentiator between running AVD purely in the cloud in Azure or running AVD on Azure Local.
Hi everyone, my name is Jayant and welcome to Jayant on Cloud. So today I have Lee Harrison from Accutech, and today we're going to be focusing on Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Local. So as you know, Azure Virtual Desktop is one of the highly successful services that are available, one of the most popular workloads that run on public Azure today. So we're going to discuss about the AVD use cases where customers need to bring some of those AVD services on premises, and we will see how AVD services can actually run on premises through probably targeted on Azure Local. So without further ado, I just want to give it over to Lee to introduce himself. So Lee, first of all, welcome to Giant on Cloud. And over to you. Just feel free to introduce yourself. What do you do? Your background. I know you've been so popular on LinkedIn. By the way, Lee is also a Microsoft MVP. So, super excited to kind of share the same platform with Lee as well. So Lee, over to you.
Thanks, Jay, and thanks for inviting me onto the podcast. So yeah, my name's Lee Harrison. I'm a principal architect with Accutech. I've been with Accutech for just over 3 years now, and my background is mainly all things Microsoft, particularly around virtualization. So for the last 10 to 15 years, I've been working with designing, deploying Hyper-V clustering solutions of one form or another, all the way back to 2008 R2. And that's led me on to what we do in more recent times, which is Azure Local and sometimes Windows Server.
That is amazing to know. Maybe just talk about what are some of the use cases why customers should consider AVD workloads on premises and why Azure Local is the best target.
Sure. So obviously, Azure Virtual Desktop, it's a scalable VDI solution. It's enabled users to access virtual desktops and applications from anywhere. That's the essence of any VDI solution. With a AVD, we have the management and control plane hosted in Azure. So we're talking about web access, gateway, broker, diagnostics, REST API. But we have session hosts for Azure Local actually hosted on premise. And that is the crux of the differentiator between running AVD purely in the cloud in Azure or running AVD on Azure Local. There's quite a few elements which I have a slide or two to go over, which hopefully will
absolutely. Feel free to
highlight.
share your slides as well. Yep.
Okay. So this is the official Microsoft architecture diagram for AVD based in Azure. And I'm going to go into a more simplified version, but just to call out the main aspects where with AVD, we have Entra ID for authentication. We have the control plane, the web access gateway broker diagnostics that I mentioned. We obviously have some networking where we're going to have our session hosts which users log into. There's going to be some storage for profiles and user data. And then there's going to be an on-premise element where end users are going to be connected to the AVD service. So if we go into a bit more of a simplified high-level view, because I find that this really helps customers understand what we're looking at rather than looking at a quite complex architecture diagram. So again, we have the control plane. So this is key. So whether you're using AVD purely in Azure or you're using AVD on top of Azure Local, the control plane is always in Azure. Okay, so again, the Web Access Gateway Broker, Diagnostics, REST API, all of those components always run in Azure, and that's key. So if you're running purely in Azure, then your host pool, workspaces, application groups where your applications or desktops are published are going to be in Azure as well. And your session hosts. So these are the servers that the users actually log into, whether it's dedicated or pooled. They're actually located in Azure as well, if you're running traditional AVD in Azure. There's going to be some kind of authentication mechanism, which is going to be Active Directory. There's going to be some storage required, again, for profile management or user data. So in this case, profiles stored via FXLogix into a storage account. And this is like a simplified high-level view of what AVD looks like if you're just running it in Azure.
Okay.
So the key differentiator to running AVD purely in Azure or running it on Azure Local becomes all of the elements at the moment at the top are what we just saw in Azure, in the cloud. And if we're going to move to Azure Local, then first of all, we're going to have an on-premise representation where we're going to have our Azure Local cluster. We're going to move our Active Directory, our authentication mechanism, from the cloud. Typically, if you're going to run on-premise, customers are already going to have an Active Directory on-premise. So we can get rid of that from the portal, and we're going to have that element on-premise. We're also going to need AD Connect or Entra Connect, as it is now, to synchronize the user accounts and groups up to Azure for this hybrid identity for authentication. Obviously, we're going to need some networking, so we need a subnet where the session hosts are going to run on top of Azure Local. And then we're going to move our session hosts, and this is key, our session hosts will no longer be running in Azure, they'll be running on your local on-premise infrastructure. Okay, so we get rid of them from the portal, we move them down to the on-premise subnet. Then we can have some infrastructure VMs to run applications, we can run storage, things like that. So we don't need the storage account anymore in Azure. And we bring those FXLogix profile management services down to on-premises as well, because that's where your storage is going to be located. And also your application VMs are going to run locally side by side with the session hosts. And then bringing it all together, the glue, the bridge in the middle that makes AVD on-premise work is Azure Arc, and that's the bridge, the connectivity up to Azure. So as you can see here, the main differentiator is the session hosts, Active Directory, infrastructure application VMs are no longer running in Azure. They're actually on your own on-premise infrastructure, connected up to the portal via Arc. But the key thing is that the control plane is still going to be in the portal in Azure. And so this is this hybrid solution where we're going to need connectivity still to Azure to manage the service.
So I'm sure this resonates really well with a lot of industries which are very tightly regulated, right? For example, they can't move their applications and data into the cloud. That's one of the reasons. And secondly, we've seen some customers with AVD probably going into Azure, especially those session hosts living in Azure, make the accessibility issue. Typically, we see latency challenges there as well. So do you think these are the things that Azure AVD running on Azure Local is going to definitely solve those challenges?
Absolutely, Jay. So if we look at the, why would customers want to move AVD on premise versus to running it in totally in the cloud, then the two kind of, I think, major items there is going to be data sovereignty and latency. So if we look at data sovereignty, some customers have internal policies where all of their data has to stay on site on their own premise, that they're not allowed to have any data outside of their own data centers, especially in the cloud. So in that case, running AVD on your own infrastructure within your own data center means that you control your own data. and there's no chance of any nefarious actors getting to that by virtue of it being outside of your data center. It gives you that control, it gives you that sovereignty, and it covers maybe some policies for particularly sensitive companies. And also, if you look at the latency aspect, then however good AVD is running in the cloud, if your application servers and your users are elsewhere, there's always going to be some latency. Even with a good express route, there's going to be an extra kind of network hops to get down to your application servers.
Especially, I'm sure it's going to be a challenge for graphical end users.
Absolutely, yeah. And so if that's a challenge for you, then, or for prospective customers, having the session hosts side by side within the same data center, within the same networks as the application servers, that's going to reduce that latency, which is going to speed up those applications and the user experience in general. So the whole data sovereignty, security, latency, these are the primary use cases why customers are looking at AVD. And also, let's not forget costs, because arguably cloud, conceptually really good. There's been a big push over the last 10, 15, 20 years to cloud, but people are realizing in some circumstances it's not the most cost-effective solution, and bringing your own infrastructure on premise can see some price reductions as well. And so it could work out being more cost efficient in the long run.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So if you look at it, there's a lot of good things going with AVD on Azure Local. Cost is one. You're going to solve latency challenges. You're going to solve the regulations that you may have. So I think these are probably great use cases for customers to today consider AVD on Azure Local. So coming back to some of the industries moving into AVD on Azure Local, we talked about security, governance, and data sovereignty and whatnot. Because it's a hybrid nature, which is basically you have the management control plane that still resides in Azure, but you have the session hosts that run on Azure on top of Azure Local. But any customers' data that move into Azure, this is for those customers who are very sensitive about data movement or data going outside of their data centers.
No, again, that's the key with data sovereignty. It does comply with governance policies for particularly sensitive customers, where none of your user data is going outside of your data center. So that's the point. The session hosts are within your data center. That means all of your user data can stay within your data center as well. So any profile information, data that the user's working with on the desktops, user shared data is typically going to be next to the session host as well in the data center. So no user data is going to traverse up to the cloud with AVD in that scenario.
That is fantastic to know. So, like I mentioned in the beginning of the call, AVD is a very, very popular workload today that's run on Azure. Now, how does AVD, especially AVD on Azure Local, compare with, let's say, other VDI solutions? You have Citrix, you have, VMware. So how does it really compare, and why should customers choose AVD on Azure Local?
It's a really good question, Jay. As you know, Citrix or VMware Horizon, they're really good solutions in of their own right. But I think where AVD comes in is it can be a bit simpler to implement, a bit less complex, certainly because you have the management control plane kind of looked after for you by Microsoft as like a managed service. There's less of that complexity and those elements that you have to stand up and look after yourselves. AVD also offers a pay-as-you-go licensing model, which is nice. It offers, I think, a big advantage as well is proper Windows client desktops. And I know that's available in other solutions, but you don't get multi-session. So again, looking at cost efficiencies, with AVD, you're able to have proper Windows client, Windows 10, Windows 11, but multi-session as well, where you can pool those client desktops and scale even further and get even more bang for your buck out of your AVD solution. So I would say it's simpler to deploy, which is more attractive to some organizations. It's more accessible. It can offer a better licensing model. I think overall it can be more cost effective, and with Windows 10 and 11 multi-session and also leveraging technologies like RDP short path just makes the
Yeah.
overall experience, I think, gives it the edge, in my opinion, over some of the other solutions out there.
Oh, absolutely. So, a lot of customers today still run, on RDS, right? So still rely on RDS, right?
Yeah.
And they run into multiple problems when it comes to, let's say, managing RDS, or they have challenges with some of the applications don't necessarily run on Windows Server. So how does AVD on Azure Local solve those challenges?
Yeah, it's a really good experience. So I think AVD, particularly if you're Microsoft centric, with AVD itself, you can take a marketplace image directly from Azure that has all the Office components already embedded. And that's a multi-session image. So rather than having to, again, to make it more, this experience of getting you started, perhaps more quickly and more simplified fashion, more accessible, you can set up AVD pretty easily, and then you can grab a marketplace image with everything you need, all the components for AVD, session hosts, multi-session, Office, FS Logics, all built in, and pull that down and start deploying session hosts from that image quite quickly. And that's going to get you into the Microsoft ecosystem, which is what a lot of people want to do. When it comes to additional applications, then you have the ability to integrate with other third-party applications out there, and then there's some good documentation and support for AVD to be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm sure since we have a very tight integration with Azure, I'm sure we can tie in a lot of those Azure constructs, like, for example, Azure Defender for Cloud, Azure Monitor, to all of those session hosts running on Azure Local, I'm sure.
That's a really good point, Jay. And because we're talking Azure Arc here as the bridge from on-premise to Azure, the session hosts themselves will be deployed as Arc VMs, and that means you've got access to guest management and all the extensions that can liven up all of those capabilities that you'd see from a traditional Azure compute. So we're talking monitoring, we're talking updates. All can be managed for your session host directly from the portal in the same experience, which makes it a really nice solution.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's going to resonate really well. I think one of the reasons why a lot of customers really love and appreciate Azure Local is because it's so much easier to manage, alongside their Azure resources, especially use some of the services like, Azure Policies, Defender for Cloud, build a overall security, strengthen their security posture, regardless of where their IT estates are running. I think that's a very, very powerful statement. Combine that with all of these ability to manage AVD session hosts, likewise, I think it's a great statement.
Definitely.
We spoke about session hosts that exclusively run on Azure Local, right? I know you may not have the answers. Is there an option that Microsoft provides where you can actually mix session hosts between Azure VMs versus Azure Local VMs? Can you mix session hosts?
Do you mean having session host in the cloud as well as on-premise? Yeah, so in Azure, you do have the ability, if you're deploying AVD purely in the cloud, to select availability groups or zones where you can have your session hosts, load balanced or distributed across different data centers and regions.
Yeah.
That's not natively at the moment an option for Azure Local. But there's no reason you can't deploy host pools with session hosts to your users, where some are in the cloud as a traditional AVD deployment and some are on premises. So once you've got your hybrid identity, once your user has an account that's got a presence in Microsoft Entra, then if you have two session hosts or two session host pools, with session hosts in Azure and session hosts on premise, then you can just publish or assign permissions to those users to either of those host pools and the applications within those host pools and desktops. And
Yeah.
so if there was, for any reason, an outage on premise, users can simply just open up a desktop within Azure itself. Now, there are some additional thoughts and constraints around that you need to be mindful of, where your profiles sit, and if you're going into the cloud from on-premise, profiles need to be accessible somehow, and same as your user data as well. So, like with any solution, if you're running something in on-premise and you then want to fail over to the cloud or vice versa, then obviously users still need to be able to get access to their resources at the end of the day. The session hosts themselves, they absolutely can be deployed into the cloud and on-premise, and users can have access to either. Now, some kind of automated failover, that's coming. We're internally looking at designs to make that happen, where you can have AVD deployed onto Azure Local and find a way of balancing over different clusters, different sites, having some kind of failover. But these are kind of designs that are a bit more advanced. And as we as Architect develop the solution for customers, I'm sure we'll be able to leverage those features and make that work.
Yeah, I'm sure those use cases will definitely emerge as customers start, throwing up some of the challenges which they have. So that's very, very encouraging to know.
Okay, so you're talking about how this looks in a lab environment or a demonstration.
Sure.
So let's move on to that and see if my lab's going to be playing nicely today. So there's a couple of things that I'll try and flick back and forth a little bit, so apologies for that, but let's try and see if I can get the flow correct. So first of all, if I just have a look at my lab, okay, so I've got a 2-node Azure Local cluster here, okay, the latest version installed, and in Active Directory I have 2 users and a group, and I have Entra ID sync connect working, and that's syncing users up to Azure. So if you pivot back to the portal, then we'll see that I have those 2 users, Labo1, AVD User 1 and 2, synced up to the portal, and I have the group. Again, if we jump back,
and these are on-prem users, right?
That's right, yeah, and we can see that group has those 2 users inside it. So this is my Active Directory environment. These are users, AD users, and that's a group that I've created. And with Entra ID sync, I've synchronized that particular organizational unit up to our Entra ID tenant, and that's why you see that group and those users listed here. Okay.
Got it.
With the hybrid identity part, you also need to have a custom DNS name in Entra ID configured. So this is where you go and register a domain of your choosing, and then you'd go to Entra ID and you'd configure and authorize or verify that custom domain. Mine's called cloudylab.uk, and what you need to do for your users is you need to add a UPN, and in your account you need to select. So my domain is labo1.local, but I've actually got a UPN in my environment called cloudylab.uk, which matches that custom domain name. And that's what I've configured the user account with, and that's important for in terms of the hybrid identity, and that's why they come into Entra with that principal name. Okay, matches my custom DNS. So when we get to AVD itself, so first of all, you can see here's the representation of my cluster. Here's my actual Azure Local cluster, how it appears via Arc in the portal. And we can see that there's my 2 nodes that we saw on premise. And to have AVD working or be able to deploy AVD, there's a couple of components that you need, and that's an image and that's a logical network. So if we look at my cluster, I have some logical networks. So I'm able to use a logical network, which is a representation of your on-premise networking. So I have a simple flat network that I use to address my session host into, and I've defined that and created it as a logical network in the cluster resource. And I've also created an image.
And these images can be from the Azure Marketplace?
Yeah, so images from Azure Local can be from the marketplace, from an Azure storage account. You can store your custom images there, or you can create a custom image locally. Like you can build a virtual machine, install all your components, sysprep it, and then you can point it onto a local share and create an image that way as well. So I have here a Windows 11 AVD multi-session desktop with Office 365 that I pulled straight from the marketplace, and that's the image that I use for my session hosts. And so once I've got my logical network and my images, then we can go to when it loads, the Getting Started tab, and you'll see that for Azure Virtual Desktop, my prerequisites have been met. And this is where we talk about the simplicity of being able to deploy AVD onto Azure Local, where I can hit on the deploy button, and I won't go through the whole process, but you'll see that it starts the whole kind of wizard to create my host pool and my session hosts and my workspace. And it's as easy as that. You just follow these steps here and select the configuration you want. And what happens is the session hosts get automatically deployed to your on-premises cluster, and they domain join automatically as well. And so, and they fully fledged. And the end result is you have a host pool. So this is my host pool where I have my session host connected to, and this is where you do all your management and configuration. So if you can see my host pool here, it tells me just on the overview that how many machines I have, how many I can connect to, how many active sessions I have, application groups and applications. And if I quickly just go down all of these are in this host pool where you set all your properties, your configuration, your session behavior, your redirection, your display details, all of the advanced configuration that you require is all there straight away as soon as you go through that initial deployment.
Fantastic.
If we, yeah, sorry.
I'm sure we can pretty much automate this as well with Azure CLI and stuff, right? So
sure, and everything that as you know goes through from the portal is going via ARM as well, so we can templatize these types of deployments.
Fantastic.
So if we move down to our session host, these are the key things. We see that I've got 2 session hosts deployed. So if I just pivot back to my on-premise environment, these are my 2 VMs, okay? My 2 session host VMs. And you can see that they're been joined to Active Directory, and that was all done by the automation, via Arc. And that's where they are. And then if we look at our application groups, this is just a simple desktop application group where I just have one desktop application. And that's my session desktop, and it's named as Labo1 desktop. And these are the assignments. So this is where those hybrid identities we talked about before, I've added the group Labo1 AVD users, which is here, which contains these 2 users as well. So this is how my on-premise, my user accounts in Active Directory have become a hybrid identity into Entra, into Azure, and then I can assign permissions for those users to this desktop session. And the end result of that is, if we open up the Azure Virtual Desktop app locally, then you can subscribe using that user account. And once you've subscribed, you end up seeing your desktop. Okay. Nice. So then if we can access that desktop.
This can be through any thin client, right?
Yes, absolutely. It'll work on thin clients as well. So if I just complete the demo by logging in.
So this is how the end user is going to experience.
This is the end user experience, absolutely, yeah. And you can see it's going to load my desktop, and we can see the host name is one of my AVD session hosts. Okay.
Yep.
And I'm logged in with my AVD user. Okay. And if we go back to the host pool, go back to the overview, then we see there's now an active session. Okay.
Okay. Fantastic.
And we also have tight integration into Azure Monitor, where we have a rich kind of selection of metrics for monitoring purposes as well. So we can see all of the things that you would ever think you would need to monitor your environment are all here. And it's very easy kind of to configure, just create a log analytics workspace, and you're able to just light up all of these metrics and diagnostics, which is a wonderful addition to be able to manage your environment.
Fantastic.
So I hope that served as a reasonable demo. I know it's
Yeah, I think
a quick
it's
demo.
pretty good. Really, really nice. It just kind of give give the viewers to kind of the end-to-end workflow of how easily it is to configure. And the best part is you manage all of this from Azure. You have all insights into what's
Yeah.
going on Azure Local and the way it's deployed automatically. I think this is really fascinating. Any final thoughts, Lee? It's been a fantastic presentation, by the way.
No, I hope I've been able to articulate the virtues of AVD enough for people that are interested. For me, Microsoft have done a really good job to make it accessible, I think is my final summary. Once you've got your Azure Local cluster, once you've got your logical network and your image, which again, very easy to do in setup, deploying AVD is really easy. Go through one workflow and you will automatically have your session host domain joined and ready to go to serve your users. Excuse me.
Integrate some of the Azure constructs as well from a manageability perspective. That's a very powerful statement as well.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right. So I think we are probably on time. So, well, Lee, thank you so much for your time. It's been such a pleasure, doing this podcast with you. I learned a lot as well. I'm sure it's going to help a lot of customers and a lot of viewers who want to kind of very keen to understand the AVD capabilities on Azure Local. So if you did like this podcast, feel free to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's Giant on Cloud. Thanks for watching.